A hypercar in an evening suit, the 177 is Aston Martin at its very best. Good stuff. Phenomenal engine wrapped in sheer beauty. It's a proper driver's car, and a piece of pure supercar sculpture. What an event. Bad stuff. Rubbish gearbox, a few Poundland cabin details. They don't pop up for sale very often. Overview. A vision of the ultimate road-going Aston Martin. Or at least, it was back in 2009 when the 177 was first announced. Then Aston boss Dr. Ulrich Bez stunned the car world when he announced that Aston Martin was going to build a limited edition supercar that would cost £1 million. This was Aston standing up against the likes of Bugatti and Pagani and saying, "We'll have a slice of your best of the best action, thanks very much chaps." While the 177 bore all the usual Aston cues, wide-mouth grille, swept-back headlights, a prolonged bonnet and cabin-back stance with a pert tail, this was not simply some sort of powered-up, flared-out Vanquish spin-off covered in papier-mâché. The car was designed around a race-spec carbon fiber monocoque with exquisite carbon subframes cradling the front mid-mounted engine and inboard suspension. This utterly uncompromised layout was then clothed in all-new aluminium panels. Bespoke lights, wheels, doors and glass were all tooled specifically for this run of just 77 cars. The deposit alone needed to secure a build slot, presuming you were very near the top of Aston Martin's preferred client list, was a plump £200,000. That left a nice, round £1 million to pay upon delivery. Fittingly, Aston's most expensive car to date was also its fastest. Deep beneath the front hinged bonnet lies the 177's main event, its fabulous engine. For a flagship Aston, it could only be a normally aspirated V12. The company's usual 6.0-liter unit was fettled by Cosworth, who ditched the usual cylinder liners in favor of a nanoscopic low-friction coating, swelling capacity to a mighty 7.3 liters, while the engine's actual weight fell by 15% to 260 kilograms, thanks to its lighter internals. This love letter to internal combustion was then shoved 100 millimeters lower in the car than Aston's run-of-the-mill V12s, buried deep where it couldn't escape or interfere with the handling. More room to suck/squeeze/bang/blow and racier parts doing all of the above meant more power, of course. Rated at 750 brake horsepower and 553 pounds-ft, the 177 was, at launch, the most powerful naturally aspirated car in the world. And while cars like the Ferrari F12 and various one-off Zondas quickly caught back up, the 177 has remained Aston's fastest road car, good for a claimed top speed of 220 miles per hour, with 0-62 miles per hour achievable in 3.7 seconds. Unlike today's rarefied Exotica, the 177 did without a plethora of driving modes. Besides a sport setting for the gearbox, there's nothing to dial up or switch around, no multi-stage traction control here. There is active aero, but the pop-up rear spoiler hardly looks like the sort of aerofoil that could keep this car pinned to a tunnel ceiling. All at once, the 177 was properly cutting-edge, and somehow charmingly old-school. While it may have been overshadowed by contemporary Bugattis going faster in a straight line, and hamstrung by its antiquated gearbox, this car deserves to be remembered as one of the most special British supercars of all time. After all, it's so exclusive, you've never even seen James Bond near one. The ultimate Aston Martin. The Valkyrie will be faster, but the 177 is very, very special. If you're a true British front-engine supercar aficionado, you'll be well aware of the bungled tale of the Mercedes-Benz SLR McLaren, and how Gordon Murray fought and lost a personal battle against Merck's boardroom culture to have the all-carbon supercar kept as light and pure as possible. It ended up being supercharged, weighed down with luxuries and equipment, and pitched as a hypercar spliced with a long-legged GT that never quite hit the mark and landed somewhere in between. The 177 shows what might have been. The is what the SLR would have been like if Murray could have realized his naturally aspirated, lightweight dream. There's a joyous sense of barely contained fury to the 177, that its engine is bloody apoplectic about being restrained inside a stunning body shell and would like to shout itself free given half a chance. Aston Martin had the gall to dress up an edgy, aggressive, take-no-prisoners thoroughbred in a dignified lounge suit. Perhaps that's the reason it's not celebrated as one of the most iconic hypercars of the early 21st century. It should be. Apart from the gearbox. The 177's transmission isn't just an Achilles heel, it's a war crime. Then again, this car represents a moment in time, before downforce, hybrid drivetrains and technological mode overload began to define the world's fastest road cars. So perhaps it's fitting this sensational engine has to duel such a truculent gearbox before it can unleash its potency on the world. This imperfection defines its place in history, like the Second World War shrapnel scars on Westminster Abbey. Or maybe in decades to come, there'll be a manual conversion for the 177, like there is nowadays for the original Vanquish, also beset by jerky gearbox purgatory. The 177 will stand for all time as one of Aston Martin's finest hours, a British Zonda, fierce and slightly preposterous. It's only a proper transmission away from being one of the true all-time greats of the analog supercar realm. Driving. The 177 hails from a time when Aston Martin was ever so slightly overdoing the whole power, beauty, soul mantra. That three-word motto even used to flash up on the dashboard as you started one of its cars. But in the 177, that self-aggrandizing sense of occasion feels utterly appropriate. Slot the oblong glass key into its spring-loaded orifice amid the dashboard and it really does feel as if you're somehow feeding the engine, which lies mere centimeters behind the bulkhead, some sort of appetizer. Press the transparent domino until flush with the console and its lights, big noise, action. The anti-clockwise rev counter moves off its stop and settles into a creamy smooth idle, backed by a wonderfully exotic, orchestral idle. While the 177's exhausts exit out of the back of the car, directly into its diffuser, they get there by running down the carbon sills, rather than through the central spine. As a result, you and your lucky passenger are completely enveloped in noise. You're about to have a very good day. As per every Aston from the past couple of decades, you select drive not with a stalk or a lever, but a D button on the dashboard. Thankfully, Aston did away with its fiddly fly-off manual handbrake for the 177, but the bad news is the company also decided a manual gearbox would have been out of place. And it fitted a robotized 6-speed, single-clutch manual, with paddle shifters. Interior. Just approaching the 177 is dramatic. Its haunches are mountainous and the way those intakes scythe into the headlights like a movie villain's face scar is uniquely menacing. Half of the long door appears to have been sideswiped by an incoming comet, carving out a huge extractor vent in its fuselage. Pop the flush door release, extend a leg over the thickset sill and drop down into the surprisingly firm seat. The door opens up a little in traditional Aston fashion, and all told access is no harder than in your average billionaire's carbotanium hyperthruster. It shuts with ease, damped on a gas strut. Drinking in your new environment, you'll note there's little sense of where the bonnet ends, most of the side mirror lens is filled with rear wheel arch muscle, and the rear view mirror is basically a suspension appreciating window. The car feels wide, brooding, and intimidating. Inside, Aston could have just pasted in a Vanquish cabin with a few more carbon fillets and headed for the pub, but instead, they created a spectacle. They had to, because of the engine. Buying. What should I be paying? Keep refreshing the classifieds, you'll be waiting a while. Only 77 177s were produced, all of which are apparently still in existence, despite a couple of unfortunate crunches, and they don't exactly pop up for sale every weekend down at the local car mart. You're going to have to know someone who knows someone. Preferably royalty. Values? Impossible to say definitively, as each car is so individual, and they're auctioned so rarely. Budget for between £1.5 and £2 million. Still, if you can get your hands on one, then Aston Martin will happily look it over for you and set it up just so. This particular example's just enjoyed a 2-year hand-assembled rebuild, complete with racier cams from the one-off Victor. Aston will dial in the suspension or change the geometry depending how you'd like to use your car. They'll even ship it about the world so you can thrap it about wherever is most convenient. The prices for such service do not, funnily enough, appear in the public domain. Even among 177s, there are rarities. 7 chassis were designated Q Series, denoting even more personalization. Look out for one by spotting the incongruous red stripe on the front bumper's lower lip, as if it's bottomed out on a speed bump and started bleeding. Running costs are steep, but come along. Are you really crossing one off the want list because it drinks at a rate of 10 miles to the gallon if you're being careful and emits more CO2 than a Bitcoin factory? This is a machine for the most fastidious, completist, obsessive Aston Martin collector, and they'll pay whatever it takes to become one of the 77. Should you be interested in this particular example of Latvian ownership, then you'll be fascinated to hear its chassis 76 of 77. It's the only one painted in Braemar blue, and its owner likes to take it to track days at the Red Bull Ring, Nürburgring, Portimao and Spa-Francorchamps. So no, they're not all garage queens.